Welcome to Sacred Stories. Today, you'll discover the incredible story of Joseph, the young man who rose from the depths of a pit to the pinnacle of power in Egypt. Betrayal, suffering, unwavering faith, and surprising redemption. Stay until the end to learn how God transformed a life marked by injustice into a plan of salvation for an entire nation. Joseph's childhood, Jacob's beloved son. Joseph was the second youngest of Jacob's 12 sons and the firstborn of Rachel, the wife Jacob deeply loved. This special affection became evident when Jacob gifted Joseph a richly ornamented robe, symbolizing his favoritism. However, his brothers didn't share this admiration. In fact, their jealousy grew with every display of preference. What further ignited their anger were Joseph's prophetic dreams. He told his brothers about one where sheaves of grain bowed to his, and another where the sun, moon, and 11 stars did the same. These dreams signified that Joseph would one day reign over them. His brothers mocked him, and their hatred intensified. Have you ever had a dream that felt too big for those around you to understand? One day, while Joseph was searching for his brothers in the fields, they plotted against him. Initially, they planned to kill him, but Reuben, the eldest brother, persuaded them to throw him into a dry pit instead. Later, as a group of Ishmaelite merchants passed by, the brothers decided to sell Joseph as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. To cover up their crime, they dipped Joseph's robe in goat's blood and presented it to Jacob, who was devastated, believing his beloved son had been killed by a wild animal. Imagine Joseph's despair, betrayed by those who should have protected him. Yet, even in that moment, God was preparing something greater. Joseph was sold to Potiphar, a high-ranking Egyptian official and captain of the guard. Even as a slave, Joseph demonstrated exceptional integrity and skill, and God blessed all his efforts. Impressed, Potiphar appointed him as the overseer of his entire household. But challenges continued. Potiphar's wife attempted to seduce Joseph multiple times, but he remained faithful to God and resisted. One day, as Joseph fled from her grasp, she kept his cloak and falsely accused him of assault. Enraged, Potiphar had Joseph thrown into prison. Even in prison, God's favor was with Joseph. He soon gained the trust of the warden and was put in charge of the other prisoners. During this time, Joseph interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the baker. He foretold the cupbearer's restoration to his position and the baker's execution. The events unfolded just as Joseph predicted. 2 years had passed since Joseph interpreted the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker in prison, and his life seemed stagnant. However, God was preparing something extraordinary. Pharaoh had 2 disturbing dreams. In the first, 7 fat cows emerged from the Nile, only to be devoured by 7 thin cows. In the second, 7 full ears of grain were consumed by 7 dry and withered ears. None of the magicians or wise men could interpret the dreams, leaving Pharaoh deeply troubled. It was then that Pharaoh's cupbearer remembered Joseph and told the king about the young Hebrew who had accurately interpreted his dream. Joseph was summoned from the dungeon in haste. He prepared carefully, shaving and changing his clothes before appearing before the most powerful man in Egypt. When Joseph heard the dreams, he made it clear that the interpretation came from God. He explained their meaning. The 7 fat cows and full ears of grain symbolized 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of devastating famine. Joseph recommended that Pharaoh appoint a wise man to oversee the storage of food during the years of abundance to ensure Egypt's survival during the crisis. Pharaoh was impressed by Joseph's wisdom and said, "There is no one like you, in whom the Spirit of God dwells. You shall be the governor of Egypt, second only to me." From a forgotten prisoner, Joseph became the most powerful man in the land, overseeing all of Egypt. Joseph immediately began his work. During the 7 years of abundance, he organized a flawless storage system. Under his leadership, strategic cities were turned into storage hubs, with grain being accumulated in immeasurable quantities. During this time, Joseph married Asenath, the daughter of an Egyptian priest, and had 2 sons. His firstborn, Manasseh, was given a name meaning, "God has made me forget all my troubles and my father's household." His second son, Ephraim, symbolized redemption in his journey. God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Not only did Joseph prosper personally, but he also prepared Egypt to face the impending crisis. When the years of abundance ended, the famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. The scarcity affected not only Egypt but also neighboring nations. Thanks to Joseph's planning, Egypt had an abundance of food and became a hub of provision for all surrounding lands. Multitudes of foreigners came to buy food, and Joseph personally supervised the distribution. Egypt, which had once relied on the Nile for survival, was now sustained by the wisdom of a man who trusted fully in God. Meanwhile, in Canaan, Jacob and his sons were suffering from the famine. Hearing that grain was available in Egypt, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to buy food, keeping Benjamin, the youngest, at home as a precaution. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they were brought before Joseph. He immediately recognized them, but they had no idea they were standing before the brother they had sold into slavery. Joseph chose not to reveal his identity and decided to test them. He accused them of being spies and, amidst their protests, demanded they bring Benjamin to prove their honesty. Meanwhile, he kept Simeon as a hostage. Jacob resisted sending Benjamin, but the relentless famine forced his hand. The brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, fearful yet determined. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his only brother from his mother Rachel, he was deeply moved but maintained his composure. Joseph devised another test. He ordered his silver cup to be hidden in Benjamin's sack of grain. When the brothers departed, soldiers overtook them and accused them of theft. The cup was found with Benjamin, and they were brought back to face Joseph. Judah, now transformed, pleaded for Benjamin's life and offered himself as a slave in his place. This act of sacrifice deeply touched Joseph's heart. Unable to contain his emotions, Joseph ordered all Egyptians to leave the room and, weeping, revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt." The brothers were terrified, but Joseph reassured them. "Do not worry or blame yourselves. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to save many lives." Joseph asked his brothers to return to Canaan to bring Jacob and the entire family to Egypt. He sent wagons, provisions, and wealth for their journey. When Jacob heard that Joseph was alive, he could hardly believe it but decided to travel immediately to reunite with his beloved son. The reunion between Joseph and Jacob was emotional. Jacob declared, "Now I can die in peace, for I have seen my son's face and know that he is alive." Joseph settled his family in the fertile land of Goshen, where they thrived under his protection. Before his death, Jacob blessed each of his sons, giving a special blessing to Joseph. He also blessed Manasseh and Ephraim, placing Ephraim, the younger, above the older, symbolizing God's purpose over human traditions. After Jacob's death, the brothers feared Joseph might seek revenge. They sent a message asking for forgiveness, but Joseph replied, "Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God turned it into good." Joseph lived to be 110 years old and saw several generations of his family prosper in Egypt. Before his death, he asked that his bones be taken back to Canaan, trusting that God would fulfill his promise to deliver Israel. The life of Joseph serves as one of the most powerful testimonies in Scripture of God's providential hand at work. Despite betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and imprisonment, Joseph maintained unwavering faith in God. Through him, we see that God is always at work, even in the darkest of times, orchestrating events for a greater purpose. Joseph's ability to forgive his brothers illustrates the depth of his character and his understanding of God's plan. He recognized that what seemed like the end of his life was actually the beginning of something much greater: the preservation of a nation and the fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joseph's story is not just about survival, but about rising above life's adversities with integrity. It teaches us that Joseph's journey invites us to reflect on our own lives. Are we willing to trust God, even when His plan seems unclear? Can we forgive those who wrong us and allow God to transform our pain into purpose? This story is a reminder that God is always with us, even when abandoned by others, Joseph experienced God's presence and favor. God is always with us. Even when abandoned by others, Joseph experienced God's presence and favor. Adversity is temporary. The trials we face today can lead to blessings tomorrow. Our lives have purpose. Just as God used Joseph to save nations, He has a unique and meaningful plan for each of us. Let this story inspire you to trust God's providence, walk in forgiveness, and embrace the purpose He has for your life. Joseph's story is a testament to God's unfailing love and faithfulness. How can his journey encourage you to trust God in your struggles? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sacred Stories. Until next time, may your faith be strengthened and your purpose revealed.